Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast. My name is Becca Syme, and today we are going to talk about what happens if I'm not sure which archetype I am. And I'm going to use this as kind of a catch-all for multiple different of our archetype systems, but specifically, this is part of the series where we're discussing the author platform growth engines. And because I talked about how those engines are not personality relevant, they are results relevant only. Like, what are the results that you have seen in your either platform numbers growth or your income, then the application differs just a tiny bit. So I'm going to talk about both in the growth engines system and then also in some of our other archetype systems. So what happens if I don't know which one I am? Because I think that's a really important question. So for the purposes of the growth engines, what happens when you don't know what you are is you treat yourself as though you are one of the two book related or content related engines, which means that you're either a laboratory or a respawn, and the action points from those videos are not significantly different enough that I think it would hurt anyone to go ahead and utilize that as an example. The primary difference is, are you someone who thrives in difference, where you're even allowing yourself to think of other things and play around with other things and potentially do one book here and one book there and one book here and one book there? Are you the type of person who needs to do that? Or are you the kind of person who needs to focus on, I've got to do everything I can to see if I can make this one thing take off? Like, how much of a stay in my lane person am I? That's essentially the question there. So if you're not sure which engine you are, I would either pick the stay in my lane engine, which is the respawn, or I would pick the not stay in my lane engine, which is the laboratory. And then those are the action points that you go into. Sometimes what happens as we're trying to figure out what we are, and I see this a lot in the questions about these growth engines, is that we're trying to think about the end point instead of where we are in the process. So if we imagine that the entirety of our career is a highway that starts at mile 1 and ends at mile, I don't know, 60, depending on how many years long our career is, we want to know what's going to happen at mile 60 so that we can understand, especially those of us who are higher futuristic, higher strategic, or we have a lot of fear around doing things wrong or failing. We want to know what for sure is going to happen in the future so that we can prepare ourselves for exactly how to get there correctly and know how to set our expectations and how to get on the right pathway and stuff like that. The problem with thinking that way is that you can't know. You can't know. It's resulting, right? And if you haven't heard about resulting, you need to read the Annie Duke book, Thinking in Bets. And I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But if you are too caught up in that, you either need to work with someone to help you soothe the fears about what will happen if you don't get what you want, because that's what that glitch is, right? It's like, well, but I don't know for sure if I allow myself to just write books if I'm going to get the success I want. To which Becca says, well, worrying about it is not helping. Me worrying so much about whether I'm going to have it or not isn't actually helping me. I need to regulate my nervous system in that way and calm the fear down and then allow myself to be creative and present. Because if I'm constantly in a fear state, I'm not allowing myself to connect with my creativity because my creativity is happening in the moment, right? So I'm not in a place where I can let that happen. So as much as possible, we want to regulate, we want to be present so that the creativity can be there, which is how we're going to do the best that we can possibly do. And our intuition is going to play a lot into this because we say this a lot around strengths, where strengths is easier because you can take a test and it'll tell you what it is and they're accurate. But it's more difficult with things like the archetypes because you can't, like with almost all the archetype systems, you can be more than one, or you could be on the cusp between them, which we're going to talk about that in a second. But in a continuum of archetypes, you could be right on the absolute line between where one shifts into the other one. I still remember having a conversation with a really high level writer about this when we were talking about the right to market archetypes, where you have the drafters and the evergreens next to each other. And she was like, I'm a dravergreen. Like, that's what I am. There's very clear evidence that I am a little bit of this one, but very clear that I am a little bit of that one. And those kind of more hybridy archetypes for me mean that how I execute on the behavior is going to have to be so much more according to my intuition. But what we say about all of these archetypes is that your intuition is likely going to guide you there anyway. It is how, it's not like we make these up and they just are like labels that we press on people. If any behavioral system is worth any salt at all, it is an evidence-based system, which means that it is taking some kind of evidence that exists somewhere about the patterns that are really there, and it's just placing labels onto things that already are very visible. So the reason that it resonates when I talk about it is because you're like, oh yeah, I do that. That feels like something that is consistent. And then when it has veracity, when the system has a veracity, that means the spine is visible. So you can see it if you can either let yourself think about it long enough, because some of it with intellection is just understanding, or if I can explain it well enough, which is why we do episodes like this, where I can say, oh, in the questions that I'm getting, I'm recognizing that there are a lot of people who are hybrid, right? Or they either think they're multiples or they're not sure which one they are. And so I kind of have two different sets of advice for those two different types of people. If you think that you are multiples because you're not sure which one you are, you may be practicing resulting. You may be trying to see too far down. And the question is, this is why we kind of restarted the series with the step one question, which thank you, Roland. That was brilliant. But when step one is, are we even sure that we're not a content driven platform? Because that's the place where the most people are going to exist, is in parts where books are creating growth, right? So if I know that the majority of people are there, then the first question is, if I don't know what I am or where I fit, can I just treat myself as though I am one of those two and attend the manuscript with 60 to 80% of my time, or attend the story or the world with 60 to 80% of my time, and then worry about doing things like discoverability first? Like, discovery is the most important because you want to make sure you're catching all of those demand pockets that exist. But then I want to be more intentional about narrowing down into things that I'm pretty sure are likely to cause the highest level of discovery. So things like a book bub, for instance, used to be, you know, the number one thing that people would say for discovery. It might be Kindle Unlimited, it might be Facebook ads, it might be first in series free. There might be multiple different things that you would try in trying to get discovery to happen. But once we understand, like, there's a high likelihood that I am a book driven or content driven platform, so I'm going to treat myself as such and focus most of my time doing the writing, then that becomes my action point, right? I want to narrow in on discovery tactics, and then I want to attend the manuscript more consistently. That's essentially what the action point was in both of those videos. So if I am asking the question, am I that first? Am I pretty sure that I'm that? And I'm just wondering if there's evidence that I might be a superstar or a sandbox, then the answer is, again, treat yourself like you're one of the two content driven platforms. If you genuinely think you're a hybrid, like you think, so for some of you have multiple platforms. We had somebody who is like, I've been struggling with this because I'm an author whose business is in phase 5, which is the mature business phase. And being in phase 5 of the business phases means you are not changing income very much year over year. And you have to do a lot of reinvention in order to help income jump, you know, like more than 20% per year. And it's the highest likelihood that you're going to end up somewhere in like a 10, 15, 20% growth, not more than 20%. It depends on how big your organization is. But most people, when they reach that level 5, where you're getting to mature business, you're not finding any new demand pockets, then the question is, do I want to iterate and try something new? Because she was saying how, like, I've done Kickstarters, or I've done direct sales and things like that to keep increasing my revenue. Or translations is another one, but she'd already done that, or audio or something, right? But in terms of discovery, like, I'm not getting a ton of discovery because I'm 10 or 12 years into this, and my business is so mature. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to change whether books will grow you, but it's not going to change whether the books cause growth. It's just how much growth will happen. So the bigger your organization is, the smaller the percentage of growth is going to get caused. You will still likely be growing if you're writing the thing that the audience wants, but you may not be. You may have to do other things to invent. That doesn't mean you're not a content platform. Because she was like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm a laboratory. And as she described it, I'm like, yep, that sounds exactly correct. But for a long time, it was like, am I a hybrid? Am I a hybrid? This is why I encourage people to ask questions. It's why we're doing the conference to give more Q&A time. But if you don't want to go to the conference, then treat yourself like one of the content-driven platforms and allow yourself to have a long-term vision for your career. Because I do think this is really important. So many of us, we want to know what the outcome is going to be. And so we go looking to things like personality for prediction or like typing for prediction because we want that security. And what Becca is saying is you have the security. Like it's okay for us to do things at a pace that it takes because the only other option is to just not ever have any patience, and that's going to be a lot of stress, and that is not sustainable, right? So sustainability means that we do everything we can to lower the stress, and that often means something like, oh, okay, so if I'm a laboratory, like I'll take one of my fiction platforms as an example. Absolutely 100% is a respawn platform, that particular pen name. It's something that I'm not really allowing myself to do any other fiction stuff right now. I'm trying really hard to focus on getting that platform to understand if I've done that correctly and to focus all of my fiction time on that one thing, right? What happens because of that is it affects all of my other abilities to do writing. It affects all of my other fiction. It affects all of my focus. It requires me to do more manuscript time. But then because I'm not currently making as much money as I used to as a fiction author, because I'm now making more as a nonfiction author, then I am now responsible as a respawn to be spending of the time I spend on that name, a significant portion of that time on my manuscript or in the world development or plotting, planning, etc. But I am not, and I think this is important because I have either a superstar platform or a sandbox platform in other places, depending on who you talk to. The temptation might be for me to try to assume that the platform engines are personality relevant and be like, well, that means I have to be a superstar in this as well. And I have to do all of these things that superstars do. And I'll admit, I started making some plans in that direction, including a really aggressive social media strategy. And then I thought, wait a minute, no, I need to wait because I've had fiction platforms before where I was not a superstar, even though, or a sandbox, even though I wanted to be a sandbox. But I've had fiction platforms before where I wasn't that way. So I'm going to let myself be a content driven platform in this, even though I have other platforms that are not, and then allow myself the time that's already taken me a year. It's probably going to take me another year to get to the point where I can actually release, but I'm doing things to pay my bills in the meantime because I know that this is the best way for me to function in a sustainable way. Could I try what I did when I was first starting and like write 24 out, and I didn't write that much, but like try to write 1,000,000 words in a year and try to push myself and do all these things, try to keep all of these other fiction platforms going at the same time. Could I try to do that? Sure, I could try to do that, but it's unsustainable for me. And I don't think it's actually going to make either this platform or these books any better. And my goal is definitely to make the platform and the books as good as they can be because that's what I want to get out of it, right? So for me, it requires an adjustment in my patience. It requires me to be thinking about making myself be in that 60 to 80% in the manuscript and not worrying about the other things yet, because I know that I'm going to do the 20 to 40% of marketing. I absolutely am going to do that. I still probably am going to bring a little bit of the sort of significance woo communication style of personality when I do it for sure. But I am not going to expect myself to be a superstar in this new platform or a sandbox in this new platform. I'm going to be a content driven platform, a book driven platform, and let myself be the type of growth engine that I think I am in that arena for right now. It may change in the future, but that's how lightly we hold these things. The primary goal of talking about these engines at all is to free you up from feeling like you have to know the outcome and making all of these decisions, assuming if I don't do them, I am not going to sell. And that's the thing that I see as a detriment to sustainability in this industry is people believing that if I don't do X, then I won't sell. And it's dangerous for me to do that because I need to sell, right? And I'm like, okay, we've got to work on patience increase. We've got to work on finding other ways to pay the bills increase, and then allow ourselves to have a platform that takes the time it takes to take off. Because taking off is possible. It just requires convergence of a lot of different things to happen. It doesn't just happen because we put the coin in, right? All of the tumblers have to hit in exactly the right way. All of those wheels have to be spun in exactly the right way in order to get to that place. So I want to allow myself just as many chances as I can to get to that space. That becomes the goal now, instead of feeling like if I don't deliver, I'm going to die. Like we don't want to get into that headspace, right? That's a dangerous, unsustainable headspace, fear. So when I can't label myself yet because I either don't have enough information. My first thing, and I said this in the previous video, was allow it to sit with you for a while, especially if you're top 5 intellection. So if you are either high learner, high context, high analytical, or high intellection, you are likely to need more time than a couple of videos to figure out which ones of these you are. So, for instance, when we're doing the conference, like I'm sending people things in early July to try to get them to start thinking about this, because they're going to have to make a choice at some point if they picked the yes, I want to miss out on everything except my stuff version, which we call the JOMO version. And if they pick that, then they have to decide which one they are, because I don't want them attending 5 days of content. I want them to know which ones they're going to. So if you already know which one you are, great. But for those of us who don't know, you may need a couple of weeks to think about it and figure it out, and give yourself a chance to parse between the two. Listen to the video again, have a comment on the video, ask me something, ask on a social media channel, ask on the Patreon, like ask in the live coaching in July or in August, try to figure it out, right? But when we expect things to happen too quickly, when we have a brain that needs more context, more clarity, more certainty, right? Like when we need those things, we need more time, then we want to allow our brain to have those things whenever possible. So it is possible that what I need is just more time. When I actually do hit that line directly between two different types. And this is going to apply both to the growth engines, because there is an overlap in, let's say, the two different content engines, the Respawn and the Laboratory. There's a line where, well, I really do want this to take off, but I'm also not as focused as maybe some of the other examples that you've given. Or I am pretty focused, but I have ideation. So I still need to think about other things. Does that mean I'm not a Respawn? And again, I would say if you're on the cusp, it's okay to sort of treat yourself as though you are both. And then you want to try to stay present in the moment. So again, the goal for both of those is to spend 60 to 80% of your time in the manuscript. That's going to continue to be the advice no matter what. So then it is, how do I get rid of the other things, the other expectations that I have about myself? How do I deconstruct those and parse through those and regulate myself and all that fun stuff that we have to do? Like those become the goal. So when I am on the cusp, it becomes a little bit more difficult to say, for sure I'm this, for sure I'm that. And it's okay to take elements intuitively from each one if you really want to. Not every single person is going to feel like this speaks my language and helps me to answer questions. You might be a person that Enneagram would work better for in that way, or that Strengths would work better for in that way. Archetypes is not going to fix everybody's everything. So when we talk about the more personality driven archetypes, if you have something like our right to market archetype system, where it's like when you are more wired in a way and then hardwired in a way that makes you naturally want to act in one of these states versus the other. Like when you have the drafters who really sort of aggressively get competitive, and they're always looking for the takeoff, and they're watching for what's rising, and they're very analytical and that kind of thing, right? But you have this evergreen who is more in the intuitive space, right? Then you're going to have drafters. So you have a drafter who feels extremely intuitive about their decisions and isn't maybe as conscious as some of the drafters that we reference about analyzing things and being very present to all of that analysis and all that data and watching the lists all the time. But you do have some of that drafter feeling then it's okay to just confirm, like, I can be both of the, I can be on the cusp between the two of these. And in whatever situation I need to ask myself a question, should I be doing this or not? Then I want to try to ask myself questions that increase my intuition and increase my trust in myself rather than saying, well, I have to do this because I'm a drafter, even though I want to do this. And it doesn't feel like I want to do it out of fear. It feels like I genuinely just want to do it. Then that's like, okay, then we are doing choice architecture by intuition. So all of these archetype systems, all of the personality systems, everything is meant to be choice architecture helpful, right? So to help you make quicker decisions and to skip some of the learning curves that are skippable. But sometimes the learning curves aren't skippable because the particular place that you fall on the continuum is either too nuanced or too complicated, and you're not able to quickly answer those questions. This is also why I and the coaches are accessible to people and answer questions in the comments whenever I can, or in our micro coaching calls, topical calls, live coaching, and individual coaching. We're accessible to you. We're trying to answer questions because sometimes the answers are not easy. And we need to allow ourselves to be wherever we are with whatever questions we have, come to them honestly, like deliver them vulnerably sometimes, and then allow the answer to speak to us and probably confirm our intuition about something. So when you are in that place, I do think it's important to acknowledge that being sort of on the cusp of two doesn't mean you are neither. It means you are both. So sometimes you're going to do one set of decisions and sometimes you're going to do the other. And what I usually encourage people to do is to trust their intuition no matter what, because those patterns are only observable in like retrospect in the past. So that's another kind of just important thing to take into account. So the other question we get a lot, which is just kind of, normal, is can I be more than one of these archetypes? So if you've seen my videos on TikTok about the archetypes, we're going to do some more archetypes content. The archetypes content, just on a side note, is so difficult for me to get through because I'm still doing a full coaching load every month. So like I'm still coaching 60 to 80 people a month right now. So if I have that many coaching sessions, in addition to trying to create content and travel and speak and be on other podcasts, etc., it's just a lot for me to try to get through all of the strengths development content we have, all of everything, all the Patreon stuff, and then also create new thought on in these archetypes arenas. So we have some of these old continuums that I've been working on for a couple of years where we haven't released any new content in that arena for a while. Like I'm just getting through the right to market archetypes right now. We're doing the book that is the follow-up to all of that archetypes work where we're going to go more in depth into that. And my hope is to be able to do that type of skills work for each one of these archetypes continuums, but it's going to take me some time to do it. So we first started doing, just to give you a sense of scale, we first started doing the really hardcore right to market archetype stuff. I was working with Nat Connors from Kindle Trends because he's got a data science background. And so we were trying to do some analysis on these different types and really get them aligned well, and understand how to maybe utilize analytical tools with each of these types, etc. And we started doing that in October of 2024. So it's now June of 2025, and I still am in the middle of writing the book because we had to do the 4 different archetypes type calls. We had to do some 7 deadly skills work on the writing to market and not writing to market. So it's like it's this whole long process to get through just one of these continuums. Whereas if I release 4 videos really quick on the TikTok, I can give you just like a hit by hit of it's okay to be this way, 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 which most of us, all we need to hear is just it is okay to be that way. Like that's what we need to hear. And there are very few things that I will have to talk to people about where I'm like, oh, we probably shouldn't be doing that. And most of those are all fear. They're fear related. And so for the most part, if you are writing in a process that's odd, that you think is odd, that you don't see represented in advice, that's selection bias. Probably there are plenty of people who are wired like you. It's very normal. It's just that you haven't gotten access to a broad enough range of advice yet, but you will at some point. So I do things like the bread machine archetypes or the bumblebee or something like that to try to help you understand, like, no, there's multiple ways to be wired. And then that's a whole continuum on its own, right? And then we have like the pace continuums where you have the trucker and the race car and the phoenix and things like that, where all of these things are relative to, is it okay for me to go at the pace that I go at, and what would it look like to be at that pace? So you have the sustainability continuum where we have the highway and the hiker and the scenic route, things like that. So each of these continuums are different. You are going to be one of the points on the continuum at some point. So you're going to be multiple different archetypes. So you might be, just to give you an example of something, like, and this is how complicated it is when we're giving super individualized advice. But the reason I study it so much is I want to be able to give you advice with certainty, right? So we used to have this tagline on the podcast, and it went, anyone can tell you what's worked for them, and they can say it might not work for you, but they can't tell you why. I can tell you why. And the reason I can tell you why is because I get obsessed with figuring out what the patterns are between successful writers. And I have no assumptions when it comes to these patterns. I'm just looking for what's honestly there, like looking at a broad enough spectrum of people in whatever way I can get access to that through coaching, usually. Sometimes I do actually ask questions, like I've done on the Patreon before. I'm like, okay, tell me about this. And I'll just ask open-ended questions and tell people to give me responses. And then I'll contact people to try to understand more deeply, et cetera, because I'm looking for these big picture patterns. But the other part of why the work takes so long is that I'm trying to do as deep of a dive into the patterns as I can so that I'm not releasing things before I understand them. And in order for them to work, in order for them to actually fix problems authors are having, they have to be alignable. Like they have to, you have to be able to line the behaviors up in a way that actually has some kind of gravity so that if I make a decision systemically, this is a systems thinking problem, right? If I make a decision systemically to use traffic as an example, in an early part of a traffic pattern, because I want to go in a different direction, one rather than the other, because I know there's like clogging over here or something, right? So I have to know that if I take a left here, it's not a dead end. I have to know that if I follow the advice 3 steps in, I'm not going to get to a point where it's like, oh, well, we didn't consider this. So now you're going through a school zone and you get a ticket or whatever, right? Like, you have to understand enough about the big picture to know if those routes are actually alignable, those routes to success. So when I tell you to take a left, that taking a left is actually going to lead you to somewhere. So I have to do a fair amount of studying to make sure that those patterns are alignable. Because when you look at something like strengths or like Enneagram that have been under study, so one for hundreds of years and one for 70 years, like they've been under study for a long time. And so people are constantly refining them and making them more and more alignable. So when you have something that is that alignable, it's been proven over time to be that reliable. Like I want to default to that most of the time. So again, for instance, you might be in a phase 2 business as a writer and then have a superstar platform and then be a phoenix on the pace scale and be a drafter on the right to market scale and be a scenic route on the sustainability scale and then be a bread machine on the manuscript creation scale and then on and on and on, right? And then also you might be, let's say, responsibility achiever, empathy, strengths, and a 4 Enneagram. So all of a sudden, the different alignments between all of those things means there's a certain predictability to how we can explain, what you should be doing in any one individual moment to make sure to keep yourself on that path and taking the turns that are going to be the most likely for you to get what you want out of your career. So that's complex. It takes a long time. So what I want to encourage people about, like, which type am I, what one am I, is it's okay to make your best guess right now and to live into that and to treat yourself as though you are that thing and to go through the learning curve. And I said this early in this talk, and I will say it again. Sometimes the learning curve is unavoidable. We use personality and behavioral science and neuroscience and things like that to try to get you a faster result whenever we can. But the bottom line is, you still may have to go through the learning curve. You still may have to learn this the hard way. If we've tried everything we can do and there still is no silver bullet and you need to do it the hard way, then the hard way is the silver bullet. That's how you get the answer. So we should want the learning curve. We should want the hard way when the hard way is going to yield us the answer about how to make it happen, how to get it done. The important thing to know is you've never lost your chance. Now that we have passed into the non-gold rush phase of this industry, whatever it is that we're going to call it, but now that we've passed into there, we've never lost our chance. There's always more chances because we have access to open source publishing. So now we are okay. And that is the reason, again, that I do all this content. So if your question about which type am I and how do I figure this out has not been answered yet, I want you to ask questions on this video or come from the audio podcast over to one of my social channels or onto the live coaching and on Crowdcast or onto the Patreon. And I'll put links to all those things in the show notes. I want you to come to those places because I want to be able to interact with you in person. This is my, we have, Claire put it this way on the, we've been doing these topical calls recently about how Enneagram filters strengths. So we did 2 specific strengths on the last month's topical call, and we did all 9 Enneagram types about those 2 particular strengths. And she made this comment as we were preparing about how to understand how Enneagram advice works. And I'm like, oh, that's so perfect about explaining to people who are taking alignment advice why we do this, right? It's like we want to shorten the learning curve for you if we can. If there's a way to make the choice architecture easier, we want to do that. But we're still only going to hit a segment that we hit. We're still not going to be able to appeal to 100%. There's always going to be those outliers who have the special circumstances or the thing, like I mentioned with the phase 5 author who wasn't sure if she was a laboratory or a sandbox. And we were trying to parse between this. And then eventually she was like, oh, I see. It's because I'm a phase 5 business. And I'm like, yes, that was the difference maker. That's why we couldn't understand how to make that advice happen. But when you understand systems, you can know there is a way that all of those things pressurize together and function together to create the gravity of your individual product or your individual platform or your individual personality, whatever it is that we're trying to make decisions about in that moment, right? But there is no pressure to understand it fully right now because part of how we learn is by going through the learning curve. So Claire had made a comment about how if she's talking about an Enneagram type, she'll talk about the type itself, but sometimes there are experiences that are still two type that are outside of that spray. So you might hit with this, like, hose, right? I might hit 60%, 70%, 80% of the people by giving this particular description, but then there's still this percentage of people who have a question or didn't understand something, or I didn't explain it correctly, or whatever. And then there's this like 30% of people or whatever on the outside that are like, but wait, does this apply to me? Where if I can answer your questions, I can see, oh yes, it does apply to you, but it's in this different language than what we were saying before. This word means something to you that it doesn't mean to me, or something like that, right? So sometimes it's miscommunication. Sometimes it is the type just blending with other things. We also have the issue between archetypes, Enneagram, and strengths, that sometimes being a particular Enneagram number or a particular strength is going to change the way that you filter information about your archetypes. So sometimes when you're listening to me discuss an archetype, if you are high individualization, high analytical, high restorative, and especially if you have those 3 together, you are the least likely to feel like anything actually describes you, because the combination of those 3 strengths together is making you have, for the analytical, a very high bar for what clarity looks like. For the restorative, a very high bar for what correctness looks like. And for the individualization, an extremely high bar for what my own personal uniqueness and identity would accept as true about myself. And almost always with individualization added on, the only thing I'm really going to see as true is something that comes from me. And the reason I know that's the case is that a crap ton of you who have those three just tried to argue with me about how I don't actually know you because you're like, no, 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 but it's not exactly that. And I'm like, right. You just did the most two type thing you could possibly have done, but it's not a negative thing. This is what I mean about like there is no such thing as a negative cause in when I talk about like personality causes. There's no such thing as a negative cause or something that's wrong with you when you don't understand what your archetype is. It is often because I haven't described it correctly. It is often because you appear in that outlier place where there's a nuance of some kind of either another personality type or some other archetype combining with it that makes you not assimilate that answer, in like the way that I would want it to have gotten assimilated because I'm trying to be helpful, right? Or it is that you've been labeled incorrectly. And so there is a mismatch in alignment of evidence because you've been labeled incorrectly. And so now we're trying to call you this thing that you aren't. So none of the advice we're giving you is resonating because you're not actually that thing. Or you have those three traits. And so just nothing I say is ever going to be 100%. And that is okay. It's not a bad thing to be that way. And the reason I'm giving all of these particular examples is that there are lots of reasons why the archetypes might not resonate, but not all of them are because you're doing something wrong in terms of like what I described at first about resulting, right? Where we need to release this expectation that we have to know the outcome or else. So we have to know mile 60 or else, right? That is something that I would like to see as correct. That is, in theory, something we could be doing better at. When it's a patience problem where I'm just not allowing myself to be patient enough and to allow things to happen and to be inside the learning curve because I want too much certainty, I feel uncertain. That is a regulation issue, and we need to soothe that. We need to do something about it. That's a place we could be doing better. Almost everything else that is existing in terms of either misalignment or not understanding is me. That's not you. I mean, it might be a mismatch in our language, right? It might be I'm saying, because I've noticed that I do this in a couple of places, that I'm saying content to mean both social media content, like newsletter content, and also the books that you write. I have done that a couple of times. I've tried to edit them out. I haven't caught all of them, but that is confusing because if you're a very concrete speaker or listener, you're hearing me say content to mean two different things because I'm not being vigilant enough about my language, which is unusual for me. But I've been tired and grieving and there's so much grieving in the last 2 months, so much change, so much difference. And so my brain has not been as on top of it as it should be. And on top of all that, I use words like platform, which somebody on Facebook pointed out to me can mean other things, right? So the way I was using it, I had to define it. Not everybody understands what an archetype is. Not everybody understands strengths or Enneagram. So we have a potential for a lot of confusion in these areas, which is why I always encourage you to ask questions. Because if I can clear up any confusion that's been caused by me, I would love to do that. But just in general, also, sometimes we have to take the focus off. So this is the like, am I doing it wrong part? Sometimes we have to take the focus off of I need the answer because I need the answer. And instead remind ourselves, wait, what I'm trying to do is choice architecture. It's what should I be doing right now? Not what should I be doing for the next 10 years, even those of us who are futuristics. Sometimes what we need is the reminder that the future can change and I can replan and it will be okay. And instead, what I need is the reminder to focus on the manuscript today and to not try to control things as much, to regulate and soothe myself so that I have an ability to, make the choices I need to make for my own creativity in the moment, which is almost always to create more security and peace and then allow myself to get into the manuscript and be creative and protect my creativity wherever I can. So, if you don't know what type you are of the platform growth engines, my first suggestion is to wait a little bit and see if time produces any clarity. Ask questions if you can, either at our live coaching or in other places, right? The live coaching is on Crowdcast and it's on the link. Again, it's betterfasteracademy.com/links. So you can look on there for the Crowdcast link, the Patreon link, our Archetypes links, the registration for the conference, all of those things. Anytime we have content available, except for our courses, those are always going to be on the website. And our coaching, which is also going to be on the website. Everything you need is on betterfasteracademy.com/links or in the show notes on the YouTube channel. So if you are in doubt, if you are frustrated, there's always the option of turning me off and not listening to me, because that may be the source of the frustration. So if you continue to be frustrated, I would try not listening to Becca for a while and see if it goes away. And guess what? If it goes away, you solve the problem. Like, you don't need me. I am not a necessary person. Like, it's okay for you to do things that don't include me. But if you are feeling better after not listening to me for a while, but you do still want to do things like strengths alignment, just know you don't have to listen to the archetypes content. You don't have to listen to the Enneagram content. You can just consume my strengths content only. And that is reasonable, I think, reasonable for a lot of us. Thank you for listening to me. I know this was a long one, and I know that I did a lot of like kind of semi-aggressive, like, okay, everybody just calm down. And I did not mean to come across that way. I think my encouragement is more, it is okay for us to feel like we're in process. And it's even okay for you to reach out to us and ask questions, because that's what we're here for, is to help with confusion. But I was so glad when Claire made that comment, because I was like, yes, we need to talk more about the fact that sometimes clarity requires either interaction, which I know a lot of us relators and introverts don't like, which is fine, or we need time, or we need, yeah, time. So I want to thank you for listening to this. I know this series has been really helpful for some of you. I know it's been a little bit frustrating for some of you because it feels like you're continuing to get the answer to be patient, and we don't always like that answer. So I'm hopeful that the conference that we're doing will help. We are also going to do more writing about this on the Patreon. If you want to go over there, we have a couple of posts there that are illustrating some of this in a little bit more depth. And then, of course, in the conference, we're going to do that as well. But I look forward to seeing you all on the next Quitcast as well. All right. Bye, everybody.